Muy buenas tardes, sean todas y todos ustedes bienvenidos a este protocolo de la ceremonia de investidura y conferencia del nuevo profesorado honorario visitante. Comentarles que el profesorado honorario visitante de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo es invitado a impartir una conferencia magistral a nuestros alumnos, a los profesores de esta casa de estudios, aquí en el Salón de Actos Ingeniero Baltasar Muñoz Lubier, ubicado en el Centro Cultural Universitario La Garza. Al término de la conferencia, se llevará a cabo la ceremonia de investidura, la cual es un evento que tiene como eje el reconocimiento oficial del nuevo profesorado honorario visitante como parte de la plantilla docente en cuestión de la internacionalización de los cuerpos académicos de esta casa de estudios. El siguiente protocolo consta de 4 etapas con rigurosas especificaciones de acuerdo a los estándares internacionales de las universidades más prestigiosas a nivel mundial para impulsar la visibilidad internacional de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo en el marco del régimen de seminarios internacionales. Muy buenas tardes, sean todas y todos ustedes bienvenidos. Para dar inicio con nuestro programa, se proyecta para todas y para todos ustedes el video institucional de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo. Adelante, por favor. tienes el aire? ¿Y está todo? Bien. Invito a ustedes a recibir al profesor honorario visitante, a nuestro rector y autoridades institucionales que el día de hoy presiden este acto protocolario de la ceremonia de investidura y conferencia del nuevo profesorado honorario visitante. Bienvenidos. ¿Quién me dice, Jorge, en qué momento?
Yo te digo, cuando ya se siente.
¿Sale?
Cuando vas a hacer la presentación.
¿Cuál presentación?
No sé si presentación. Entonces, nada más
Anuncio a Roberto Rodríguez.
ya cuando están arriba, pues hacer la presentación.
Atando bien la pendejada. ¿Pero lo vamos a sacar nosotros?
Sí,
¿Sí es justicia en el deporte?
sí, yo te lo mandé por mi WhatsApp.
Antes de dar inicio con la participación del nuevo profesor honorario visitante, el doctor Berman, con su conferencia Justicia en el Deporte, escucharemos la lectura de la semblanza y exposición de motivos por el secretario de Desarrollo Internacional de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo, el doctor Roberto Rodríguez Gaona.
Buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Con el permiso, señor rector. Es un privilegio recibir el día de hoy al profesor Berman, que ha sido galardonado con el Premio a la Excelencia Docente de Texas por parte de la Universidad de Texas en el año 2008, por su influencia positiva en la expresión educativa en los estudiantes de Derecho. El profesor Berman estudió la licenciatura en Gobierno en la Universidad de Harvard, así como la maestría en Ciencias Políticas por la Universidad de Michigan. Se unió a la Facultad de Texas en 1998 y más tarde ha trabajado en la Corte de Apelaciones del Cuarto Circuito de los Estados Unidos de América. Ha sido profesor visitante en las facultades de Derecho de la Universidad de Michigan y la Universidad de Chicago. El profesor Berman es un especialista teórico en el área legal, reconocido internacionalmente, y está enfocado principalmente en profundizar nuestra comprensión colectiva de los problemas y enigmas que se plantean en el área legal como práctica normativa, es decir, una práctica que crea o intenta crear las entidades normativas tales como los derechos, deberes, facultades, permisos y prohibiciones. Actualmente es profesor en la Escuela de Derecho de la Universidad de Pensilvania. El doctor Berman se centra en el derecho constitucional y en el derecho penal. Es un verdadero placer para los que nos dedicamos a la filosofía del derecho haber tenido una exposición muy erudita el día de hoy en el taller relativa a la punibilidad y el significado y justificación de las penas. De nueva cuenta, sea usted bienvenido, doctor Berman, a esta universidad, y agradezco de nueva cuenta a esta comunidad universitaria. Muchas gracias.
Damos inicio con la participación del profesor honorario visitante, doctor Berman, que presenta la Conferencia Magistral Justicia en el Deporte.
Buenas tardes. Muchísimas gracias por invitarme a este festival sobre la justicia. Me siento profundamente honrado de estar aquí y estoy muy agradecido por esa introducción y toda su hospitalidad. Muchas gracias. Lamento que solo hablo poquito de español, como es obvio, y por eso necesito hablar con ustedes en inglés, con su permiso. Your theme for this week is justice. What can we say about justice? Well, there are many and diverse forms of justice. Justice seems to come in many different varieties or flavors. To start, we often speak of distributive justice. Distributive justice is a field of justice that concerns the proper allocation of material resources across members of a community. When we urge that wealth be redistributed from the wealthy members of our community to the poor members, we are invoking that form of justice that we, at least in English, call distributive justice. And of course, just as there are wealthier and poorer members of a given community, there are wealthier and poorer members of the international community, wealthier and poorer states. And when we are concerned with the distribution of resources between the wealthy nations in our world and the poorer nations, we often speak of global justice. Closely related to the ideas of distributive justice and global justice are social justice, economic justice, racial justice, gender justice. These are all varieties of justice that, in more or less the same ways, demand that special regard and special concern be given to the poor, the oppressed, the most disadvantaged amongst us. But that does not exhaust the forms of justice. We speak of corrective justice and compensatory justice. These forms of justice concern the need to fix or repair what we have broken. Corrective and compensatory justice are the forms of justice that many legal scholars believe underwrite or support or justify that branch of law known as the law of torts, the law of personal wrongs. When you injure someone and you ought to pay compensation for that injury, we think we are in that domain of justice that we describe or call corrective justice. And there's retributive justice. Retributive justice concerns giving wrongdoers their just deserts, the punishment that they deserve or merit. This is the root of the biblical idea of an eye for an eye. And some people, as I say, believe that this form of justice underlies our systems of criminal law, that it is just right or deserved that people suffer or are punished for their blameworthy wrongdoing. Other people think differently and speak of restorative justice, that the proper response to crime is the need to repair what has been broken in the relationships among members of the community. And then there's procedural justice. Procedural justice requires an authority to adhere to adequate procedures before imposing adverse consequences upon someone. Before you are convicted and punished for a crime, the state has to follow certain procedures. Maybe you have public welfare benefits, and those are going to be removed from you. The state, then we think, still has to follow certain procedures before bringing these consequences to bear. Procedural justice speaks to that matter. And justice need not concern only human beings. If we owe things to non-human animals or to the natural world, we enter the domains of animal justice or environmental justice. So, again, we have many forms of justice: distributive justice and global justice, social justice, economic justice, racial justice, gender justice, corrective, compensatory, retributive, and restorative justice, procedural justice. And even this is not a comprehensive list. I was searching online the other day, and I found water justice and food justice. Pretty much anything you like, you can add justice to it, and it seems that much more compelling. So justice looks like a fairly vast and unruly subject. Justice is not only concerned with the matters that the wonderful artwork outside seeks to convey, matters of social justice. What then makes all of these different forms of justice forms of justice? What is the commonality among what appear to be somewhat disparate things? Social justice and retributive justice and procedural justice are in obvious ways dissimilar. What is it then that unites them and makes them all forms of justice? In other words, what is justice? Not what is distributive justice or what is social justice, but what is justice itself? That is the question that Socrates famously addressed in the best known of the Platonic dialogues, the Republic. In the Republic, Thrasymachus proposes that justice is nothing other than the interests of the stronger. Justice, we might say in English, is the idea that might makes right. Polemarchus, another discussant in that famous dialogue, proposes that justice means helping friends and hurting foes. Socrates disagreed with both of these ideas and said justice is minding one's own business, playing one's appropriate role. Plato had a picture of the self in which the self consisted of three different parts: the rational, the spirited, and the appetitive, roughly corresponding to the mind, the passions, and the desires. And therefore, according to Plato, justice is a virtue in which these different parts of the self are in the correct alignment. So justice is the state in which your passions and your desires are subordinated to your rational understanding, and that your desires are in turn subordinated to your passions. That's what justice is. And then Aristotle came along, and he disagreed with Socrates and Plato and said, justice consists in treating equals equally and treating unequals unequally. St. Thomas Aquinas said that justice is the virtue or the willingness to give everybody everything to which they are entitled. Others have had different views. David Hume, the great philosopher of the Scottish Enlightenment, said that justice is just respect for property rights. And for utilitarians, like Jeremy Bentham, justice isn't anything special at all. Rather, here's what we ought to do. We ought to try to produce the most pleasure in the world and the least amount of pain, and justice is just doing that. So what is the point of going through these famous thinkers? Only to suggest that the very nature of justice is something about which the philosophical community is very much divided. We all have a sense of what justice is, of course, but the job of philosophers is to move beyond the general sense of things that we all start with and ask deeper questions. Yes, we have a rough sense of what justice is. Justice is not something you sit on. Justice is not what you have for breakfast. It's some way of treating people and perhaps other beings in the right sort of way. But philosophers want to know more deeply than that. And I think the truth of the matter is that we don't have a very clear handle on what justice is. This is the point in the lecture in which I should tell you what justice is. Well, that's not going to happen. I want only to say something rough and general. I find it helpful to view morality as consisting of two broad branches or departments. One branch of morality concerns actions that are forbidden to us or possibly required of us. And the other branch of morality concerns states of affairs that we should try to bring about. That's a little abstract, so let me say a little bit more about what I mean here. The first branch of morality, that involves actions, tells us what we are forbidden to do. Do not kill, do not rob, do not rape, do not steal, and so on. And sometimes also tells us certain actions that we must do. Keep your promises. Respect your mother and father. Notice that the language of justice is usually not employed in this context, at least not in English. We would not normally say in English that murder is unjust, or that justice requires that we not steal from others. I'm not saying that that's wrong. Obviously, we wouldn't say murder is just, but we wouldn't normally say murder is unjust. We would say that murder and theft are wrong, that they are forbidden, that they violate people's rights. The second branch of morality concerns not so much what we should or should not do, but what the world should look like. You might ask yourself, am I allowed to do this? And that's what the first branch of morality answers. No, you're not allowed to do that. But instead, you might ask this question: how could I improve the world? And in order to answer that question, you need to have a sense of what makes the world better or worse. We don't think the answer to the question, how might we improve the world, is make it more yellow or have more herons. Justice is the domain, I think, that supplies answers to this big question. How should ideally the world look? Justice is that branch of morality that concerns how the world ideally should be arranged. Justice holds up a picture of how the world ought to be and urges us to work to bring our actual world into closer conformity with that ideal picture. The core concepts of the first branch of morality is the concept of right, I think. People have rights, and you may not violate their rights. The core concepts of the second domain of morality, the domain of justice, are fairness and desert. The world goes better when wealth and resources and opportunities are distributed in a fair manner. And in addition, it goes better when people get what they deserve. So let us suppose that what I have just said about justice is broadly correct. Justice concerns, ideally, how the world would be arranged, how goods and opportunities and health and education should be distributed, and how lives should unfold based on considerations of fairness and desert. If all that is so, what is justice in sport? Because that is my topic today, justice in sport. Well, instead of offering a general definition, let me start with some clear examples. So here's one example about justice in sport. Major League Baseball in the United States was born in the 1870s. For 70 years, Major League Baseball excluded black players. This is a clear instance, I take it, of racial injustice. Racial justice demanded that black people be allowed into baseball, just like racial justice demanded that black children be admitted into white schools, from which they were excluded through much of the United States. And as it happened, Major League Baseball allowed black people to play in 1946, when Jackie Robinson famously broke the color line. It would be another 8 years before the United States Supreme Court held that under the US Constitution, states were required to desegregate the schools. In this example, there is nothing special about sports. Sports is one area where racial justice demands that people of different races be treated equally. In schools, in the parks, on buses, and in baseball. Here, sports is nothing special. Let me give one other example, not now of racial justice, but of gender justice in sports. In many countries, and for most of history, sport has been an overwhelmingly male domain. For example, when the modern Olympics started in 1896, it was open only to men. There were no women athletes at the first modern Olympics. Women were allowed in for the second games, the Paris Games of 1900. But as recently as 1992, 35 countries were still fielding all male delegations. As recently as 1992. In the United States, where, as you may know, college sports are a very big deal, colleges and universities have provided vastly more athletic opportunities for men than for women. In 1972, the US Congress passed a law called Title IX, which required that colleges and universities provide equal opportunities for men and women. This is an important law for a variety of reasons, but here's one thing. The United States men's national team in football is currently ranked 28th in the world. The United States women's national team is currently ranked second and was ranked first for 6.5 years straight until December of last year. That is a product of the success that that law had in requiring girls and women to have equal opportunities to participate in sports. Those are examples of racial justice and gender justice in sports. And those are obvious examples. And I'm not going to talk more about them. And instead, I'm going to talk about less obvious examples. And I will admit right now that the other examples I will talk about are much less important. I hope they will be interesting to you. Maybe I will say things that you didn't know or that are unusual, that you disagree with. But I will acknowledge at the beginning that I am now shifting to talk about issues of justice in sports that are of much lesser importance than all that I've spoken about thus far. In a sense, you've already gotten your vegetables, and now I can offer you some dessert. So here's one thing that I think about under the heading Justice in Sports. The World Cup. The 2010 World Cup in South Africa was a great success in many ways. It was a great success for South Africa. It was a great success for Spain. It was a great success for people who like listening to the vuvuzelas. I assume that's not many people. It was also great for officiating errors. I probably don't have to tell you this. In the round of 16, Argentina beat Mexico 3-1, partly behind a goal by Carlos Tevez, scored from a clear offside position. In that same round, the referee bizarrely missed a goal by Frank Lampard of England against Germany, when the ball hit the crossbar and landed almost a meter into the goal mouth and wasn't called a goal. In the group stage, the US was victimized by an inexplicable and unexplained whistle that erased what would have been the winning goal against Slovenia. There were many blunders in that World Cup. In response, FIFA President Sepp Blatter, a long-standing opponent of technological aids to officiating, changed his tune. And he said, maybe we need technology to tell us when a goal is scored. If that technology had been in place, England would have been credited with a goal against Germany. But it wouldn't have helped Mexico, and it wouldn't have helped the United States. Those were errors that goal mouth technology couldn't help. Instant replay could have corrected those errors. And last June, FIFA announced that it would consider using instant replay. In March of this year, however, FIFA said, not anytime soon. It would continue to study the topic of instant replay. Now, I acknowledge that instant replay in football raises difficult questions. What plays should be reviewed? How to implement instant replay so we don't keep stopping the game like American football? So it's a hard question. But here's one thing to say in favor of instant replay in football. It would promote justice. How is that? Simple. If you actually scored a goal, you deserve to be credited with the goal. If you score a goal from an offside position, your opponent deserves that the goal not count. If justice is arranging things in accordance with desert, getting things right would promote justice. Is it the most important form of justice? But it's a form of justice. If we care about justice in sports, we have a reason to have instant replay. Now, a more controversial example. Diving. Simulation. The usual question is whether it is cheating to dive on the football field. This is very controversial. As you probably know, there are differences of opinion across countries. The English think that diving in football is pretty much the worst thing that happened to the beautiful game. In the United States, we're not very keen on diving either. There is a reputation that Latin speakers think diving is just part of the game. If you can get away with it, it ain't cheating. Is diving cheating? Well, that depends, I suppose, on what cheating is. So here's one thing that people think cheating is. Cheating is intentionally violating a rule to gain an advantage. If that's the right definition of cheating, it seems to me that diving is cheating. But I don't think that's the right definition of cheating. Why not? Well, the laws of soccer prohibit any player from intentionally impeding the progress of any opponent. And yet we know that all players are grabbing and pulling and jostling and impeding during every corner kick and all set plays. And nobody thinks that's cheating. Or in basketball, players intentionally foul to stop the clock or to prevent a layup. That violates the rules, and nobody thinks it's cheating. So I don't think the definition of cheating I just gave you is right. What is the right definition of cheating? That's actually a surprisingly long story, and I won't bore you with it. I will just say that on my view, I'm with the Mexicans. Diving is not cheating. However, our topic is not cheating, it's justice. And I think even if diving is not cheating, it is clearly unjust. If the defender takes the ball cleanly, he deserves possession. If he takes the ball cleanly, he does not deserve to be carded. The diver seeks to achieve results that depart from what is deserved. And if justice is allocating the world to accord with deserts, then the diver is an agent of injustice. So if you care about justice, you can't dive. Here's another topic in justice in sports: competitive balance. The issue arises because clubs in big cities can have lots of money. In the United States, the big markets or big cities are New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, Dallas. These teams in such cities have built-in advantages. My guess is some of you may have heard of the New York Yankees. Maybe most of you have not heard of the Milwaukee Brewers. Good, Roberto is shaking his head no. Why is that? Because the New York Yankees are in New York, the biggest city in the United States. It is just a little village compared to Mexico City, but it is the biggest city we have. 8 million people in New York City, 20 million people in the metropolitan area. Milwaukee is the capital of Wisconsin, a Midwestern state best known for cheese. Its population is 600,000 people. The New York Yankees can bring in lots of people to its games. The New York Yankees can sell their broadcasting rights for much, much more money than the Milwaukee Brewers can. So the Yankees get wealthy, and they can buy the better players. So they win the World Series lots of years, and the Milwaukee Brewers don't. So what? Well, it seems plausible to me that this is unjust in the same way, not to the same degree, in the same way that it's unfair that a child born in La Ciudad Perdida should have life prospects so far inferior to children who have the good fortune to be born in Polanco. It's unfair, and we think a matter of social justice. In the same way, not to the same degree, it might seem unfair that Milwaukee doesn't have the same chance to win the World Series. The World Series is what we call the championship in the United States. The World Series. In the same way, it's unfair that Milwaukee doesn't have the same chance as the New York Yankees. It's not a level playing field. In the United States, the National Football League, the League of American Football, takes this concern seriously. They think justice requires that teams in small cities have a real chance, not just the teams in the big cities. And there are ways to give that chance. You bring all the money into the league from broadcasting, and then you give every team the same amount, the big team and the small team. And you put a limit on how much any team can pay all the players. That makes everything equal. I don't know if any of you are fans of American football. If you are, you may have heard of the Green Bay Packers and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh is a town of 300,000 people. Green Bay is a city of 100,000 people. And yet, the Green Bay Packers and the Pittsburgh Steelers are champions of our league, often. because we have justice in the National Football League and give every team a chance. I want to say that La Liga MX does a good job. It used to be Club America, Chivas, Cruz Azul, and Pumas. They were always the winners. Right? It was the big four. Not any longer. Not any longer. Now you have champions from Toluca, Monterrey, and most importantly, Pachuca. You have achieved a measure of competitive balance. You have struck a blow for justice. Much better than other football leagues. In the English Premier League, Manchester United, Manchester City, Chelsea, Arsenal, maybe Liverpool, maybe Everton. That's it. Nobody else has a chance. In La Liga, Real Madrid, Barcelona. Are there any other teams? I don't know. They have annual budgets 3 times more than the next team. Nobody can compete against Real Madrid and Barcelona. In Portugal, in 80 years, 3 teams have won the championship every year but 2. So I think you should all hold your heads high and say, La Liga MX is the league of justice. I don't know how you've done it. I hate to say, maybe El Pacto de Caballeros actually helps justice here. It prevents the wealthy teams from being able to buy the good players. It's bad for the good players because it depresses their salaries. But it's good for the small clubs who have a chance. Maybe, maybe not. I'm going to give you one more example. This talk is entitled Justice in Sports, and I have really concentrated on football. However, Mexico has a very rich, distinguished history in boxing, the sweet science. I suspect many of you are fans. I want to offer congratulations to Canelo Alvarez. He's not here, is he? For his decisive victory on Saturday night. Here is a quiz. A quiz. How many professional fights has Floyd Mayweather lost? How many? 0, I hear. Yes, 0. By defeating Manny Pacquiao 2 weeks ago in the most boring fight I have ever seen. Mayweather ran his record to 48-0. 48-0. But many knowledgeable observers believe that he lost once. Many people believe he lost in 2002 to the Mexican boxer Jose Luis Castillo. There was one newspaper headline at the time that said, Mayweather loses the fight, wins decision. loses the fight, wins the decision. How can that be? How can a boxer lose the fight but win the decision? If you win the decision, you won the fight. In a sense, yes. In a sense, no. The decision could have gotten things wrong. Here's one way the decision could be wrong. You could have judges who are corrupt or incompetent. But here is another way that the decision could be wrong. It concerns the way that fights are scored. Boxing uses what it calls a 10-point must system. A 10-point must system is the way boxing is scored. It means the winner of a round gets 10 points. So how many points does the loser get? If you don't know boxing, you might think any place from 1 to 9, depending upon the round. If it was very close, score 10-9. If it was very decisive, score 10-3, maybe. That makes sense. That's not how boxing is scored. More than 95% of all rounds are scored 10-9. A slight victory, 10-9. A huge victory, 10-9. This is the story of the Mayweather-Castillo fight. Mayweather won the first several rounds by a little bit. Castillo won the later rounds by a lot. Castillo landed 173 power shots throughout the fight. Mayweather landed 66. A dominant outing for Castillo. But the rounds that Mayweather won were scored 10-9, and the rounds that Castillo won were scored 10-9. And because the judges thought that Mayweather won one more round, he won the fight. This is like in basketball. If the Spurs beat the Lakers by 15 points in the first quarter, and the Lakers score one more point in the second quarter than the Spurs, and one more point in the third, and one more point in the fourth, the Spurs would have many more points. But the Lakers would have won 3 quarters, and the Spurs only 1 quarter. We don't score basketball that way. But that's how we score boxing. I tell you today, Castillo deserved to win that fight. So the scoring system should be changed to produce more justice. You should leave here and say, we learned a lot about social justice, the photos, and the event that was right before this one. And we learned something not as important, that the scoring system in boxing should be changed to promote outcomes that are in accord with what is deserved. Those are a few thoughts about how we can promote justice in sports. I hope some of them are non-obvious. But I started by mentioning social justice and global justice, and I end up talking about the scoring system in boxing and about instant replay in football. And that seems very trivial. It might seem that I am not taking very seriously the topic of this important festival. So let me say, you can't complain because the title of the talk is Justicia en el Deporte. But I want to say something more than that. In the United States, this is the time of graduation from high school and from college. And in the United States, graduation ceremonies are a very big deal. All of the graduates come to a room like this, or maybe much bigger, but not more beautiful, with their families. And someone very important, much more important than I am, stands up here. The President of the United States, maybe, or his wife, and tells the graduates something important. Tells them about their lives, go forth and live this way. A Mexican friend of mine told me that graduation is not very important in Mexico, and I was told a short while ago that that's not true. So I would like to offer just a few concluding thoughts in the spirit of a US-style graduation speech. These concluding thoughts are modest lessons about intellectual virtues and ethical virtues. And I direct these thoughts especially to the students here, and even most especially to any graduating students. So here are two concluding lessons from what I've said so far. The first is about what I call intellectual virtues. It is common to think that sports are not serious. Sports are fun, but they're not serious or important. There are important things in the world, and there are not very important things. And we should keep these things separate. That is one view, and I think that view is a mistake. We can learn important things from unimportant things. Consider what biologists call Drosophila melanogaster. In English, we call that the fruit fly. It is very, very small. Maybe the smallest of all flies. You might think not very important. And yet, scientists have learned many things of great importance regarding human genetics and combating diseases that affect human beings by studying this very unimportant, tiny little fly. So we should be open to the possibility that we can learn important things by looking in places that seem less important. Justice is a hard topic. Maybe sometimes we can learn something about justice by focusing on little areas, like sports, and not only on the big areas, like the areas that are pictured in the very moving photographs all around the courtyard. Maybe. Beyond that, many of us are analytic by nature. We enjoy thinking hard about all areas of life. And some people will tell you, if you want to think hard, exercise your analytic powers, you should apply them to something important, not to something like sports. And all I want to say is, different strokes for different folks. I don't know if that translates. But the point is, we are all different in our sensibilities and our tastes. And you students, as you go off in life, should never be shy about applying your intellect rigorously, not only to the important things that you have studied in this university, but to anything and everything that strikes your fancy. I started thinking about sports in a serious way because here are two things that are true about me. I'm a philosopher. I don't say that's good or it's bad. Some of you may be artists. That is the way you engage with the world. I engage with the world by scrunching up my face and looking really hard at a problem and thinking about it. And hope that wisdom strikes. And the other thing is I like sports a lot. So I started thinking about sports as I'm watching the game. And I think, why do they do it that way? And every now and then, I learn something that's useful, not only for sports, but for the practice of law. Why? Because sports are legal systems. FIFA is a legal system. That's why it's called laws of the game. There are rules. There are people who enforce the rules. There are people who make the rules. We can learn things about legal systems by paying attention to sports systems. In much the same way, we can learn things about human genetics by paying attention to the genetics of Drosophila melanogaster. So that's one lesson. You don't have to think about sports in a serious, analytic, philosophical way. If you just like to play sports or watch sports, well, good for you. But if you like to think about it, don't let anyone tell you that you shouldn't. Now here's my second and last lesson, and it's about ethical virtues. I remember when I was a freshman in college, that was over 30 years ago, the first book assigned in one of my classes was Thucydides' famous work, The Peloponnesian War. And we were given maybe 10 days to read it. Have any of you read Thucydides, The Peloponnesian War? I don't remember how long it was. I think around 1 million pages. Maybe it was fewer. But it was long. It was long and heavy. And I knew there was no way I was going to finish it in 10 days. So what's the thing to do? Give it your best shot. Read as much as you can. No. I said, there's no way I'm going to finish it, so why bother starting? I don't recommend that to you students. But I bet I'm not the only person who ever felt this way. Justice can be like the Peloponnesian War. I don't think it's terribly hard for most of us to abide by the rules in the first branch of morality. I don't mean abide perfectly, but by and large, most of us can follow the moral rules that say, don't kill someone, don't steal, don't rape, don't rob. Because it always governs actions that we can perform or not perform. But justice is about bringing the world into greater conformity with how it ought to be. And that looks like a big task. There's so much injustice in the world. The idea that we should pursue justice might seem to be paralyzing. We're not going to be able to make this world just. We're not going to be able to fix the injustice in the world. And so some of us might think, why bother to even try? Just like I said, why bother even opening that big book that I know I'm never going to be able to finish? Now, some of us, I know, think differently. Some of us commit our lives to promoting justice, promoting social justice. Photojournalists, like those who are exhibiting in your festival, community leaders, members of the clergy, members of the medical profession who bring medicine down to the poor in Chiapas, social workers, some of our elected leaders, lawyers who represent the poor and the disenfranchised. And we are very, very lucky for such people. But that is not the life for all of us. After all, the world also needs cobblers and waiters and bus drivers and musicians. It is not for all of us to devote all of our energies to promoting justice. And there are some things we can do. Some things we can do, some ways we can promote justice to try to make the world more just than it is. And that's all, I think, that's commanded of all of us. It is a mistake to feel that because you yourself cannot do very much, or may not be able to do very much to promote justice, in the big picture, you can't do lots in little ways. There is justice and injustice all around us, not only in big things, but in small things too. That is part of the lesson of justice in sports. I know that the examples I discussed with you are not really important examples. It's not really important whether we have instant replay in football. But it may help to see that justice, the opportunities to promote justice, are all around us in our everyday lives. In everything we do, we can ask ourselves, would this promote justice? Or would it promote injustice? We have opportunities to promote justice or to retard it in all ways, to go down to Chiapas and help the poor there, and even on the football pitch. You could, for example, decide not to dive if you're not fouled. And if you make that decision, you would be standing up in the smallest of ways, I understand. but you would be taking a stand for justice. So I suggest we can all try to pursue justice in the big ways that really matter, but even in those very little ways that would seem not to be very important to anyone other than to ourselves. Muchas gracias por su atención. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Invitamos a nuestras autoridades y por favor pasan a ocupar su lugar en el presidium para dar inicio con la ceremonia de investidura. Nos acompañan presidiendo esta ceremonia de investidura el maestro Humberto Augusto Veras Godoy, rector de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo y presidente del Consorcio de Universidades Mexicanas, el CUMEX. Bienvenido, señor rector. El secretario general de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo, maestro Adolfo Pontigo Loyola. El secretario de Desarrollo Internacional de nuestra universidad, doctor Roberto Rodríguez Mono. El nuevo profesor honorario visitante, doctor Michel Berman. El secretario general del Sindicato Único de Trabajadores y Empleados de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo, licenciado en Psicología, Florencio Flores Hernández. Y el presidente del Consejo Estudiantil Universitario del Estado de Hidalgo, Jorge Mayorga Olvera. Se procede a la investidura de la beca académica por parte de nuestro rector, el maestro Humberto Augusto Veras Godoy. Al público en general que nos acompaña, respetuosamente los invito a ponerse de pie. Nuestro rector hará entrega un reconocimiento como nuevo profesorado honorario visitante. Si por favor ocupan sus lugares, escucharemos el mensaje de aceptación del nuevo profesorado honorario visitante, doctor Michel Berman.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. You have already spent too much of your beautiful day listening to me, so I will not speak at great length. But I do want to express my very sincere gratitude to the university, to Secretario Dr. Rodriguez, Secretario General y estimado Rector, for honoring me with this distinguished professorship. It is a great pleasure for me always to come to Mexico and to spend time with the Mexican people who have always been extraordinarily warm and welcoming to me. And this occasion is certainly no exception. Your university has shown me great hospitality, from picking me up very late last night with Lupita and Miriam, in addition to Roberto. I had a very, very pleasant conversation with your president just a short while ago. I have been extraordinarily impressed with the artwork that you are exhibiting during this festival. Both the work by the professional artists and your student artists. I am terribly impressed with the talent that is clearly here at your university. And I am very, very grateful for the honor that you have paid me by inviting me down, by welcoming me so kindly. And to all of you for coming and spending your time so patiently and listening to my brief remarks, or not so brief, with attention and respect. So I just want to say in conclusion that I am deeply grateful for this honor. I am privileged to be a distinguished international professor at your university. And I will certainly post that diploma or that you gave me in my office in a prominent place, so that others of my colleagues and my students can see the name of your university and can know of the good work that you do here. I know you have a very ambitious long-term goal, and I want to wish all of you the greatest success in achieving that ambitious goal. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
En este momento se procede a la firma del libro de profesorado honorario visitante. Se firman los siguientes libros: Profesorado honorario visitante de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo y becas académicas de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo. Se procede primeramente a la firma del libro Profesor Honorario Visitante de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo. Ahora se procede a la firma del libro Becas Académicas de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo. Escucharemos el mensaje de bienvenida dirigido al nuevo profesor honorario visitante por parte de nuestro rector, el maestro Humberto Augusto Veras Godoy.
Muy buena tarde, tengan todas y todos ustedes. Saludo a nombre de la comunidad universitaria con gran admiración y respeto al doctor Berman. Bienvenido a la que desde hoy es y será siempre su casa, la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo. Agradezco a quienes nos acompañan en el presidium, al secretario general de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo, al secretario de Desarrollo Internacional, al secretario del Sindicato Único de Trabajadores y Empleados de la Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo y al presidente del Consejo Estudiantil Universitario. Agradezco también la presencia de los directores, de las directoras de las escuelas e institutos, de los funcionarios universitarios, de los investigadores, pero fundamentalmente quiero agradecer y resaltar la presencia de ustedes, los estudiantes de la Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo, las alumnas y los alumnos que son la razón de ser de nuestra casa de estudios. Gracias por estar aquí. La máxima casa de estudios del Estado de Hidalgo se engalana hoy al recibir al doctor Michael Berman, premio a la excelencia docente por la Universidad de Texas. Es un honor recibirle y sobre todo para todos los jóvenes que serán beneficiados con su participación en el programa de régimen de seminarios internacionales, el cual forma parte de las actividades de innovación educativa de los estudiantes, en donde la calidad académica se caracteriza por la excelencia de los programas académicos, alumnado e infraestructura. Doctor Michael Berman, sus conocimientos en el área del derecho son notables y trascendentales, especialmente en los ámbitos de la teoría constitucional, filosofía del derecho penal y la jurisprudencia del deporte. De manera especial, destaco el deporte en virtud de la importancia que tiene en nuestras vidas como una actividad cotidiana, la cual debe ser regulada mediante su perspectiva y también dentro de su normatividad, teniendo presente la jurisprudencia del deporte, porque no solo se trata de una regulación, sino que es una ley, pero además de eso, se trata de darle la importancia como sistema legal con su propio derecho. Sus publicaciones en el área del derecho, doctor Berman, han trascendido y es símbolo de admiración y ejemplo a seguir. Es una distinción para la Autónoma de Hidalgo que usted haya aceptado que a partir de hoy forme parte del claustro de profesores honorarios visitantes. Muchas gracias. Nos sentimos muy contentos por su distinguida presencia, su talento creativo y amplia experiencia como investigador, que le han proporcionado las habilidades para cruzar fronteras en el campo del desarrollo que usted tiene y que desarrolla. Reitero que a partir de hoy, esta su universidad es su casa, en donde se le admira por su entrañable trabajo. Tenga presente que los corazones de los alumnos y el profesorado forman parte de usted, pero que además de eso, como decimos en esta máxima casa de estudios, a partir de hoy, usted es Garza de la Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo. Muchas gracias por su presencia y porque somos Garzas, somos universitarios de excelencia. Amor, orden y progreso. Muchas gracias.
Garzas.
Respetuosamente los invito a ponerse de pie. Vamos a escuchar el himno universitario por excelencia, Gaidiamus Igitur.
Secundem iutem viva profesores, viva Berman, viva Berman, sempre sigue gloria, sempre sigue gloria. Viva el Respublica et viva Regi, viva el Respublica et viva Regi, viva nostras civitas, nel Senado Caritas, plenos di fraterni, plenos di fraterni.
Si por favor ocupan sus lugares dentro del marco de esta ceremonia de investidura y la presentación de la conferencia magistral, tenemos la participación de la Camerata de Cuerdas de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo. Ellos interpretan Danza Húngara número 5. De esta manera finaliza la ceremonia de investidura y en este momento se procede a la toma de la fotografía oficial con el nuevo profesorado honorario visitante y nuestras autoridades universitarias. Invito a ustedes a despedir a nuestras autoridades que el día de hoy presidieron la ceremonia de investidura y la conferencia magistral. Por su presencia, muchas gracias. Muy buenas tardes.